Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Joel Moran Show. Today I got a special guest with me, Tyler from HoopVenue. Tyler, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Appreciate you having me. I'm trying to get into more podcast type of content, so it's a good opportunity to get some thoughts out there. Appreciate you, man.
And there's no better person to have on because you're extremely knowledgeable on the NBA. I see the YouTube videos you pump out, the analysis that you bring to the YouTube space, and I'm glad to have you talk about these topics. Today we got some breaking news that Cat is injured. We don't know the timetable for his return, but we're going to talk about that. Before we get into that, though, I want to get your NBA title favorite because when I see you on Twitter, I always see these historical stats referencing how great the Boston Celtics this year truly are. Is that your pick to win the finals?
Man, that's a tough one for me because I remember last year my finals pick was Celtics Nuggets, and I went with the Celtics. And of course, they flamed out against the Heat. So a lot of people are like, "Well, they're going to flame out again. They're the same team, same problems." But I feel like two major things changed for the Celtics. The first is the addition of Kristaps Porzingis, of course, adds more like of an inside out element to their game that they didn't previously have. So people were saying they were dying at the 3-point line. That's because their entire offense was 5 out with Robert Williams playing pick and roll. The difference with Porzingis is now you have like a legit, I think he's the most efficient post scorer in the NBA. So you get an element to the offense that didn't exist. And that's the perfect counter to Miami's zone, which was like their kryptonite. So I think if they get the Miami matchup, they have the zone breaker with Porzingis. So I see the Bucks. I see a healthy Knicks team as like threats in the East. But like for the most part, I feel like if the Celtics are clicking, they should cruise through the conference. And that's where it gets tough because again, I feel like it's going to be Celtics Nuggets. That's like my pick again. And I feel like that series is so unpredictable.
In the East, I really don't see much competition for the Boston Celtics. I don't think the Knicks can beat them in a 7-game series. I mean, in the East, we're talking about a team like maybe Orlando giving them some type of fits with potentially that second round matchup because the Magic are the 4th seed right now. And if they advance, they'd face the Boston Celtics. Milwaukee, their defense is improved, but I don't know how much I really believe in that just yet. I have to see a little bit more, especially against top-notch teams. It really just is the West, and the Nuggets seem like they are the favorites right now. What is one thing that's holding you back from saying that the Celtics will win the championship? Is it Nikola Jokic being on the opposite side, or is it something within Boston itself?
I think it's a pretty tough question because for one, I do think the Jokic wrinkle is really interesting because if you look at like the Celtics defensive numbers, the one thing they struggled with most this season is post defense. And it's because their new lineup, they don't go with the double big as much, especially in the starting unit. So they have Porzingis, and Porzingis's weakness defensively is the center of gravity. He can get thrown off his spot, he can get bumped. So I feel like in a specific matchup with the Nuggets, Porzingis isn't going to be able to offer that resistance against Jokic that you really need to slow down the Nuggets offense. And then you're forced to play the double bigs because, I mean, I don't think Horford as your only 5 in the Jokic minutes is sustainable. So I think you kind of have to have both Horford and Porzingis on the floor to shut off the paint. And then I feel like you're sacrificing some offense because who are you taking off the floor? Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown. Like I feel like the 5-man unit that they have with Horford off the bench has been so good offensively that in order to defend Jokic, you have to sacrifice some of that. And it's like a trade-off that I think on the margins, like just gives the Nuggets a very slight advantage.
I've seen this stat. Jason Tatum has shot 15 of 46, 32.6% in the clutch time this season, which ranks 25th out of 25 players with a minimum of 45 field goal attempts. That is what scares me with the Celtics. Jason Tatum has had some great playoff performances, but I kind of researched this stat by myself the other day. Of the 40 plus playoff games that he played, I think in 14 of them, he shot under 40% in the last 2 seasons. Ultimately, the number I came up to was that in 33% of playoff games, Jason Tatum is going to shoot under 40%. He's going to have a bad shooting night. And I think those margins for a superstar level player are just a little bit too inconsistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100% get that. And I think that has to do with like Tatum's own flaws as a player because I feel like I've complained about this multiple times where it's like, I feel like he has all of the tools to be just this devastating downhill presence. And I feel like he goes into these modes where he gets met with physical defense and starts to really settle. Like, and I think it just comes down to like, is the shot falling? Because I remember they faced the Timberwolves twice this season. Both games were just classics. And in the first Timberwolves game, Ant and McDaniels were really like physically guarding him on the ball, and he kept settling for step back threes and just they weren't falling. Then they faced the Timberwolves again a couple months later. Same exact thing. The shots were falling and he went off for like 45. Celtics win. And I think it's like, what version of 3-point shooting Jason Tatum are you getting? I'm pretty sure since the new year, he's shooting like 39% on pull-up threes or something, which is like, if he's hitting those, that's scary. But that's a good point about the late game execution, because there's no more surefire, like, we're closing this game than the Jamal and Jokic 2-man game. Like, the Lakers series in the conference finals really hammered that point home, because every game was close. And then it was like, hey, we're just going to do the 2-man. There's nothing you can do about it. And I feel like that is like just this ultimate chess piece. It's like having 2 queens on the board. It's like, hey, we're going to battle with you all the way until the last minute. And then there's nothing you can do to like close it out against us. That's just crazy to me.
There's something to be said about having a team that in the clutch will execute. One of the things that have kind of caught me off guard this year has been how bad the Suns are at fourth quarter offense this year.
Mm-hmm.
They're dead last in offensive rating, and it is mind-boggling, because I think even if you have one of the 3, KD, Booker, or Beal out there, you shouldn't be this bad. ESPN showed this stat the other night that they have the worst net rating in the fourth quarter. Second worst is Golden State, and Phoenix is second times more worse than Golden State. I think they have a net rating of -14. Golden State is like -7 in that range. And I'm just like, Phoenix is still a top 6 seed in the West. If those fourth quarter offensive woes can somehow become a little bit better, I mean, we're talking about a team that is a serious threat. In 10 games this year they've lost where they have had a lead into the fourth quarter. You just say they win half of those. I mean, that's 5 more wins for them. We're talking about them like one of the top teams in the conference, even with all the injuries they've had. I
think it's funny that we just talked about the Nuggets late game execution, the Suns struggling, but like the most recent matchup was the Suns outperforming the Nuggets in the clutch. I think it's like a funny coincidence. But the thing for me is, I tweeted this during that game. I think the Suns kind of have a big struggle point where it's like the variety of KD scoring at this point is just very shot. Like, he took the exact same pull-up midi on, I think, 8 straight possessions and made one of them. And it's like, it's again the Tatum thing. It's Kevin Durant's relying on a tough diet of shots because he's lost the change of direction. He's lost the first step. He doesn't get to the rim nearly as much. And so he's kind of relying on that mid-range to just have unlimited access. And I think when the shots are falling, it's like, what can you do? I mean, the guy's 7 foot. You can't contest him any better. But when it's not falling, the Suns get really messy because they kind of just play through KD. They're like, hey, KD, go get us a bucket. And if it's the same exact shot over and over again, it's just relying on like variance. It's like you got to get lucky. And I feel like they don't have that same type of late game execution, like something they can just go to, like the 2-man game with the Nuggets. And I think that's like they're big because it's kind of your turn, my turn. Booker's going to try an ISO. KD's going to try an ISO. Beal will maybe get a handoff from Nurkic, but it's like, I feel like they don't have as much of a structured approach in the clutch.
That's a great point. In overtime, those same shots Kevin Durant was hitting. And that's just the variance with him, that he's going to be inconsistent, but then in overtime, he seals the deal. What is astonishing about Phoenix, though, is that I feel like they do get some pretty good shots. In the fourth quarter of that Denver game, I feel like there was a lot of wide open threes from Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal. KD took some, Bradley Beal took some, and they just miss. They just miss good open looks. And I do think that they can kind of sometimes play into hero ball, where Devin Booker comes down the court with 22 seconds left on the shot clock and takes a 3 to try to gain back momentum. And that kind of shoots down the momentum if he misses that shot. I think Phoenix, they could be much better, but somehow there's just something about them that you just inherently don't trust at this point.
100% agree. 100% agree with that.
Moving forward, Minnesota Timberwolves, we talked about them a bit. Karl Anthony Towns has an injury, a left meniscus injury. We have a diversity of reporting right now. Woj says that there's no timetable for his return. We don't know if that he's going to miss any time, if any, right now. And Sham says that he's out indefinitely. So right now, there's still a question mark about whether or not Cat is going to miss time, whether he can play through this injury. But as it stands right now, let's just assume that he's not going to be back this season for the Wolves because that's worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, if Cat is not back, what are the Wolves' playoff chances? Are they a first round exit, or can they somehow manage without Cat?
I think it depends on matchup. Like, I think if they get a lucky break with the how the play-in works, like I still think they beat the Kings in a playoff series. But like, if you are lacking your number 2 offensively and you run into Luka Doncic or Steph Curry or LeBron and AD, then you start to run into some issues. My thing is, the starting 5, I don't actually think is going to look any worse. I think when you slide in Naz Reid, the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but over the season, the numbers have been like phenomenal with that 5-man unit. And I think it's like a trade-off. I don't think Naz has the same type of offensive skill set as Cat. I don't think he's like as good at like hunting mismatches. He's obviously still a great shooter, but not quite Cat. He can't pass like Cat. But I think the big difference is the defense, because you're taking what they already have in the double bigs, the added rim protection and rebounding, but Naz moves like a wing. Like, he can switch. He covers a ton of ground. So I think it's a trade-off. You're losing some of the offensive juice and you're replacing it with more defensive versatility. My problem is the other minutes. When Gobert's off the floor, they've relied on that double big Naz and Cat look to carry the load. The problem is now they're kind of forced to play Kyle Anderson. And Kyle Anderson is a very, very poor offensive player in the playoffs, just because the lack of shooting, lack of scoring, lack of speed. And that's what scares me. I think their starting 5 can still hold up. I do worry about their offensive execution in the half court without Cat a little bit, but the non-Gobert minutes are what really scares me without Cat.
This is just unfortunate timing, and it feels a lot like last year when Memphis went through a variety of injuries before facing the Lakers. And even I still picked Memphis in that series, but looking back, I'm like, man, I wish I would have picked LA. And now this year, Minnesota's gonna like you said, they're gonna match up against one of these 4 teams, either Dallas, the Kings, the Lakers, or Golden State. The Kings you feel comfortable against, but the other 3, you go, oh my goodness, we can really get upset in the first round. For as incredible of a season that this year has been, if they go out in this fashion, it would be incredibly disappointing. The Timberwolves are 7 points better with Cat offensively. They're 3 points better on defense when he's off the court. So I think the defense will look even better with Cat not playing. And I think the fact that they lean on their defense a lot, it can maybe have some positive results. Because I look at the lineup, if they don't go double big, if they go like with a wing heavy lineup of Conley, Edwards, Nikhil, McDaniels, Gobert, I think defensively that's very suffocating.
Yeah.
And you hope that Anthony Edwards can do or carry the load offensively, and he can be that engine for them. I want to see more out of Jaden McDaniels. If we're not getting Cat, I really want to see more out of Jaden, because I feel like he does have the skill set. At times, he does flash some shot creation, but because he's not one of the main options on his team, he doesn't get much of an opportunity. And I don't know if I'm just holding out hope with Jaden at this point, or if there's still something there with him that maybe he can up his average to like 15 or 16 while Cat is gone.
I definitely think McDaniels has the scoring talent to do something like that. I think for one, just like the length and athleticism, attacking closeouts, he's got a pretty decent 3-ball. And he's got a pull-up mid-range game too. So that's another like good counter. It's kind of like the young Mikal Bridges on the Suns skill set, where it's like, I can hit the corner 3. If you close out too hard, I'll attack it and get to a pull-up midi. For me, the big problem with McDaniels is like the actual decision making. So I think if you get him in more spots to attack off the catch where it's just like a quick move score, he can definitely up his average. But the problem is, I don't really think he's a guy you can like put the ball in his hands and it's like, we're going to set some screening action for you to come off and make a decision. He doesn't have that type of skill set. So I think that's where it becomes messy. And I don't know if they have the type of playmaker to really squeeze as much juice. like I look at like a Trey Young, a Luka Doncic, like those type of guys I think can take a scorer like McDaniels who doesn't have the decision making and take all of that load away. I think Ant's improved. I think Conley's a great decision maker, but I don't think either of those guys are the type of playmakers that could really like squeeze all of that value out of McDaniels. So you're kind of left with a guy who's like gonna spot up, gonna attack some closeouts, but for the most part is just kind of there for defense.
Yeah. The offense is going to be much worse. Without Cat, they have an offense rating of 111 in the possessions without him. So it's a putrid offense. Even with him, they're an average offense. The downside with Cat, though, is that on drives this year, he has a 10% turnover percentage, and he only passes on a little under 20% of his drives, which is the third least. So when the ball is in his hands, he is very much a ball stopper. The ball will stop with him and he will not pass out. And I think maybe losing Cat can add more movement to the offense where there's more of a rhythm for other players that are playing next to Ant. But I just feel like unless we're getting a nuclear Anthony Edwards in the first round, which is a lot of pressure to put on somebody that's just 22 years old, but I think that he's capable. It's very hard to see them getting out the first round and even having high playoff hopes this year.
Yeah, well, I really think it depends on the type of series too, because every now and then we get these playoff series where it's like it just turns the clock back to 2004. Like Knicks Cavs last year was straight up all defense. Both teams had like a -10 offensive rating, and it was like who can scrape together the most competent offensive possessions. And I think if Minnesota finds himself in a series like that, they're in great hands. Like if it's really slow and messy, because like you said, that defense is absolutely suffocating, whether they go with the smaller lineup and get Alexander Walker, or if they go with the double big and have Naz Reid switching across the board. Like if Kyle Anderson can play in that type of series. If nobody's scoring, he's a versatile defensive semi-big, like forward. So I think if they end up in a series like that, they also added Monte Morris. I like that pickup. Definitely have enough pieces offensively and like the tough shot making of Ant to just like scrape together. But I think if you get into a run and gun series like with Golden State, that's where it starts to get a little scary. Because it's just like they don't have the offensive firepower to just run and gun with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kuminga, all those guys. So I think it's very matchup dependent, and I think it'll come down to whether or not they can control the pace of the series.
What are the chances that this Timberwolves team has a similar effect to the grit and grind Grizzlies when they lost Rudy Gay?
I mean, it's possible. It's possible because we've seen throughout history, there have been teams where they lose a key player and it's like opens up a new game plan. Like the 99 Knicks lost Ewing and then made the finals as an 8 seed. It doesn't mean Ewing's a negative player. It's just like it unlocks something. Look at the Cavs recently. They went 19-1 without Garland and Mobley. They found Dean Wade and Sam Merrill to be like these incredibly valuable players. So I think there is an opportunity for that. I think that'll be something interesting to look at, actually.
Yeah, I'm definitely keeping that comparison in my mind and saying, okay, let's see how the Timberwolves look, because I'm not ruling them out just yet. I want to see how they look like without Cat, because last year there was a stretch where they looked pretty damn awesome when he wasn't on the court, and Anthony Edwards took a big time leap. So it's definitely a wait and see for me.
100%.
Which current star right now do you think that's a young star is the most overlooked? He's not talked about enough.
Man. I mean, if we're going young stars, I feel like the first one I got to look at is Zion Williamson, because it was just fresh in my mind. I was scrolling through Twitter and there was you have to remove one of these guys. And I think it was Lauri Markkanen, Scotty Barnes. I can't remember the third, and then Zion. And I was like, when did Zion end up in this group and not like the top 15 to 20 players group? Is it just the injuries? Is it the weight gain? I don't know. But Zion's looked phenomenal over their last 10 or so games. The Pelicans are like 8-2. He's averaging 7 assists a game. He's still a very efficient paint scorer. He's leveled up playing like point Zion. I just feel like what he does always has like an asterisk attached to it because of the negative connotations with like his off-court stuff, his injury history. But I think when he's healthy and playing right now, and he's still clearly like not giving 100% effort until the playoffs, I just feel like he deserves a lot more credit for the type of offensive production he puts together, because There's very few players in the league who can shift a defense in the way that he does with his paint scoring.
The in-season tournament loss for them did irreversible damage to the perception around Zion and the Pelicans, because the way that they are talked about is only when it's somebody like Stephen A talking about Zion's weight, or how much, like, Zion is not invested, and nobody really talks about their team at all. Like, nobody talks about the Pelicans at all, but they are a top 6 seed in the West. You would think that they were outside the play, or they were a team like the Houston Rockets. I think Zion Williamson's a great name because, while I do think there are some valid concerns around, like, the injury history with him, and trying to keep an eye on the durability that he has, man, I think when they unleash Point Zion, it is one of the most effective offenses in the NBA. And a thing that I'm definitely tuning into right now is what they do with Brandon Ingram eventually, because I know that right now they're yielding good results with Ingram, but I do feel like to fully maximize Zion, you just have to put the ball in his hands more, and that means taking away a player like Ingram who commands so many touches.
Yeah, that's an interesting wrinkle because I think both of those guys have a very good off-ball game, but it kind of like, I don't know. I wonder if they can unlock it in the way that Middleton and Giannis kind of figured it out. Because I feel like at points during like that tenure, people would kind of complain about like Middleton isolating too much, or they would say Middleton's taking the ball away from Giannis, or Giannis isn't a versatile creator. They need to go to Middleton down the stretch. And I feel like there was a very big concern there. And then they really unlocked it with the pick and roll. It was like, we're going to have Middleton setting screens for Giannis for one. We're going to have Giannis setting screens for Middleton. And they kind of unlocked the two-man game, especially during that 2021 run, like against Phoenix. The two-man game was crazy. And I think if the Pelicans can find a way to unleash that, they've got everything else in place. Like they have an elite shooter in Trey Murphy. They've got Herb Jones is shooting 44% on threes this season. And he's like maybe the best non-big defender in the NBA. I feel like the bigger question mark is Valanciunas, because I think he kind of fits like with what they're trying to do. Like I think he's really good as a screener for Zion. He's really good on the offensive glass. But I do wonder what they would look like either with a more versatile defender like an Evan Mobley type, or a stretch five. Like if you're running pick and pop with Zion instead of like kind of just pick and stand there. I wonder if the Valanciunas question mark is a little bit interesting to me.
Like if they had someone like Brook Lopez, how much would the offense improve?
Right.
I have a list of young players here, and I wanted to make this list for exercise purposes. What player am I going to take to build around these young players? So Zion is in the middle for me. I have Zion, and let me know if you agree with this. I have Zion over Chet to build around.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Zion over Jalen Williams.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cade Cunningham.
Yeah. Although I will say Cade's looking tough right now. He is.
He is.
I love Cade.
Scotty Barnes.
Yeah.
Franz Wagner.
Yep.
Evan Mobley.
Yep. I think it's interesting because I wouldn't be surprised if a few of those guys end up being better than Zion, but I think that's a little bit of a different discussion than building around. Like I think Chet and Jalen Williams can both be really good, but I feel like both of them have more of a complementary skill set.
I agree.
So I feel like that's where the Zion wins the argument, because Zion's one of those put the ball in his hands, surround him with role players, you're guaranteed to be good. Whereas like I feel like Chet Holmgren is more of like you give him a star like Shea, and he's gonna just exponentially build the value from there.
I agree. These are the players I had above Zion, so these are players that I would take over Zion to build around. This first name, it kind of iffy. I didn't know if I really wanted to put him over Zion, but let me know if you agree. LaMelo Ball.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think for me, I think it's tough because I think LaMelo has one big question mark that worries me, and it's the interior scoring. I think it improved this year, but I feel like we see these guards who aren't like physically strong. When they get into the playoffs, the lack of rim scoring really like down ticks their efficiency. I think Trae Young and Garland are two really good examples in recent years of like players who they get to the playoffs and it just looks a little bit like they get roughed up a little bit. I think LaMelo has that issue, even though he's a lot taller. I think LaMelo's like, dude, his playmaking though and his outside shooting.
Yeah.
I almost feel like LaMelo would kind of go into the group where I could see him being a number one, but I almost want him to be a complementary to like if Brandon Miller takes that like Paul George type of leap. So I think if I was building around, I think I would prefer Zion. But I definitely see the case for LaMelo because of that playmaking.
I love that answer. Alperen Sengun.
Ooh, another tough one because I think that's the weird one with the defensive structuring. Like, how does it look building around Sengun? That's a weird one because I feel like with a non defensive center, I won't say Sengun's like this. A lot of people act like he's just a traffic cone. He's been playing pretty good defense this year, and they're a top defensive team. So I don't want to take away from that. But I think it's like the Jokic thing where he clearly has exploitable issues. He's also not as big as Jokic. And for me, he has to develop the three ball because I think the way to mitigate a lack of a truly good defensive center is to have a four that you can play next to him and have him be a spacer. Like they use Jokic up top as a spacer because he's a threat to shoot. I think Sengun, if he adds that, it's kind of like the Sabonis thing too. Like, how do you build around Sabonis? He can't shoot, so you can't put a defensive-minded four next to him unless they're also can shoot. And so I think Sengun, there's a pathway to him becoming a better building piece than Zion, but I think it's a lot harder to find that piece.
And Houston is hoping that Jabari Smith can be that four that can be versatile defensively, can shoot 40% from three. Still waiting on Jabari. I think Jabari is going to be good. And then these next three, it's pretty much like maybe consensus: Tyrese Halliburton, Paolo, and Anthony Edwards. I think at this point, probably over Zion.
Yeah, I was gonna say I do wonder. I just think it's really weird with Zion because of the injury thing. I think that's where it's really like I feel like the envisionment I have for healthy Zion is just like such a crazy player, but it's almost like, does that even exist? Like, is that even realistic at this point? So I think that's where it becomes really tough in this discussion.
Yeah, with Zion healthy, you can argue he's with the top guys here. He definitely doesn't belong in the bottom half of this list. That's 100% for sure. The stars that I had that I feel like are under talked about, Paolo Banchero. The fact that Orlando, if I'm not mistaken, has had 0 nationally televised games this year. He's a first overall pick, and he's averaging 23. He does it all. He rebounds, he play makes, and he has been the best player on the Magic. And they're playing so well right now, and there's really no attention for what he's doing.
Yeah, I really like Paolo's game. I wonder, my big thing with Paolo is I still like see a lot of decision-making woes. Like, I think he's pretty turnover prone. His shot selection can be questionable at times, but I also, on the other side, wonder how much of that actually has to do with the way Orlando's structured and the way they run their lineups. Because if you look at Paolo's like on-off numbers, I made a tweet about this recently. Every player in the Magic rotation has a worse net rating when Paolo's on the floor with them versus without. And it's like just the signal that suggests he's dragging them down. But when you really dive into the rotations and stuff, the Magic run they take Paolo off the floor. They run like Franz and all of the starters with like, they'll put in Gary Harris, their best shooter. And then they'll run that lineup. And then Paolo will come in with like this junkyard squad of bench players. And it's like, he's literally asked to do everything on the court for them. And he keeps them afloat. In this recent stretch, like he's been elevating, the efficiency's looking a lot better. Really good playmaker. And I feel like if I'm a little lower on Paolo in terms of just like raw value right now, but in terms of where he's gonna be, like in a couple of years, I don't know if I could possibly be higher. Like you can, every time you turn on a Magic game, you just see it. Like you see where this guy's headed. And yeah, if he figures out like that mid-range jump shot, gets it up to like 45, 50%. He's got elite foul drawing. He's physically really imposing. He's a versatile defender. He's the real deal. That guy's a hooper.
The Orlando Magic's big three right now, it reminds me of the Celtics with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Marcus Smart. I feel like this current Magic team has that type of identity with Paolo and Franz, if he gets consistent as a shooter, we're talking about him as one of the best wings in the NBA. And Jalen Suggs, the way he's revitalized his career, even though it just took some time to develop and he was injured a little bit. But the way that he's come along for this team, this is exactly what they expected and what they could have hoped for. He's been just so crucial to them defensively and pestering guards at the point of attack and pestering pick and roll actions. I just feel like Orlando, they're trending upwards. I don't know what that means for their playoff standing this year, if they're going to get out the first round or not, but this is one of the teams to be excited for. And if we didn't have a team in the West in OKC doing historic stuff at such a young age, we'd be talking about Orlando as the rising young team in the NBA.
100%. And I don't know if you saw this tweet. A tweet went pretty big recently. It was the top 5 teams in the West and the age of their starting lineup. And the Magic was like 21, 22, 22, 21, 21. Wow. And it was like these guys are like, they don't play anyone that in their starting 5 that's like past their 3rd year. The fact that they're 10 games above 500, they have, I think, the number 4 defense. This team's serious. I think they just need to like clean up on the margins a little bit, get like maybe some more shooting that can also like be a starting level player. And they're scary. They're going to be good.
The other star I had was Alperen Sengun. I love Alperen Sengun. He reminds me a lot of Jokic, and I know that's a big comparison. He's baby Jokic. I feel like oftentimes we get lazy with comparisons, and it's like, okay, Sengun, 6'11" European, Sabonis, 6'11" European, he's Sabonis. I don't think Sengun is really Sabonis. When I look at Sengun, I'm not talking about his game from a ceiling standpoint and where he could be, but just simply from a play style standpoint, I think he does look more like Jokic when he plays offensively, playing through him from the post, where Domantas Sabonis, most of his shot types are shots that are created for him, versus Sengun, he's creating his own stuff. And I think the evolution in his game in the mid-range, taking double the attempts he took from last year, it's something that he's actively trying to improve at. And I think if he can improve that shooting long-term, then it really boosts his value and where he could be as a star.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me about Sengun, I actually did a video on him this season breaking down his game. And what I really like about Sengun is obviously like he got the Jokic comparison because of the passing. Like, he's a really flashy and creative passer. But I feel like when you watch Rockets games, he actually operates a lot closer to a guy like Embiid. Like in the way he picks his spots around the elbow, the way he faces up, the way he will throw a bunch of jab steps and then attack. I feel like it's like a blend of I definitely don't think he's going to be a Jokic level passer. Like, I definitely don't think that, but a very good passer who operates like Embiid. So it's almost like a blend of the two. And I think he's such a fascinating player. Like, I remember at one point this season, I don't know if it's still that way, but he was setting the since tracking started, he was setting the record for pick and roll points per game, like as a roller. And it's because not only is he a great screener and he can play in the mid-range short roll, he can make those passes, but also he's really quick to get downhill and he can get above the rim. So he's a very good athlete. And I feel like people kind of overlook that when they do the Jokic comparison. Like, Sengun's way more above the rim, way quicker than Jokic is. And I guess my hot take would be, I think the peak version of Sengun is actually talked about more for his crafty scoring than his passing. I think right now people talk more about his passing, but I think Sengun's best trait will be his scoring when he's at his peak.
I love that. Sengun's post game is so refined right now. Yeah. And that's where like I kind of separated the Sabonis and Sengun comparison, because I feel like Sabonis in the post, it's very much just trying to bully his way into it, getting close enough to the basket and then finishing around the rim. Where Sengun, the footwork he has is elite for his age and very advanced. And I think that's already a part of his offensive game that is elite. He's an elite post scorer, where with Sabonis, it's more so like rolling, cutting, putbacks, getting offensive rebounds. With Sengun, it's more so he's self-creating his stuff, like I mentioned earlier. And I do think if the shooting comes along, we've seen him work on that one-legged fadeaway, sort of the knockoff Dirk fadeaway. It's gone in. Some games it's very consistent, and he's using that shot. And I'm just hoping that he can improve that mid-range, because I feel like that is the missing piece to what you're talking about to becoming one of the better scorers in the league.
Yeah, the thing with me for Sabonis is I can't shake out of my head the way that I know people point to the Warriors like sagging off of him in the playoffs and making him just like non-existent. But I think the worst thing was when he would post up, they would only play his right shoulder. They would completely not play. Like they would angle themselves to let him, he could turn over his left and have a layup every time. And he's physically incapable of turning over his left shoulder. And I think that is just like when you, that's where the Sengun comparison starts and ends. Sengun would never be played to turn over a specific shoulder and have a layup, and then he can't do it. Like Sengun's way too crafty, way too robust of a scorer to get the Sabonis comparison. So that, yeah, I agree with that for sure.
The most improved player award over the last 10 years, these have been the winners. Lauri Markkanen, Ja, Randall, Brandon Ingram, Pascal Siakam, Victor Oladipo, Giannis, CJ McCollum, Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic. I think over half of these are deserving winners. There are some years where the Ja Morant year, does he deserve it? He's a former top pick. This was expected of him. And I feel like this year we're kind of running into like a similar question, not with the top pick stuff, but Tyrese Maxey last year was great. He wasn't an all-star, but he was a tier below. He wasn't that far from it. And this year, he's the favorite to win MIP. And we have two other candidates in Kobe White and Jalen Johnson who average single digits and this year have taken massive leaps. Do you think that there's something broken with the MIP award, or do you think that it's fine the way it is?
I think it's a very case-to-case thing because I see the argument because if you look at like past most improved players, it's more so like kind of forgettable people. They like took a leap that was unexpected and then they kind of were never actually superstars. And I think it's really tough to pinpoint where exactly to draw that line because I do think we should give credit to guys taking that leap to all-star and superstardom because that is the way harder leap to make. Like if you're already good and you leap into like this next tier, that's really tough. It kind of reminds me of when you talk about ceiling raisers on teams. Like if a team has 50 wins, turning them into a 60-win team is a lot harder than making a 20-win team a 30-win team. And I think that's where it's like very case specific. I think we're talking about this year. I definitely see the argument for Maxey. I see why people are gearing towards that side because they lost hard and then he kind of just filled the void. But then you kind of have to question, was he already capable of this if he just had a bigger role? And for me, I feel like it should be Kobe White, no question, because Kobe White had people questioning if he was a negative player.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and now he's like a top 10 shooter in the league and he's just awesome for the Bulls. Yeah, so I think it's a very case specific thing.
That's an excellent point that you make because I think when we talk about Jalen Johnson, that to me feels more like a case where he just got more opportunity. I feel like Jalen Johnson was a capable player. He's just finally playing more, and now his stats look this way. You can make a similar case for someone like Jonathan Kuminga, who this year is playing much better, and you can argue, well, Steve Kerr was having him in a doghouse for, God knows how long until Kuminga finally snapped and went to the media and called out Steve Kerr. Kobe White does seem like the obvious choice because you're right. I mean, I didn't think Kobe White had this in him. Tyrese Maxey, even if I didn't think he had like all-star stamped in him, he was still a 20-point per game scorer. And when you take somebody like Harden out of the picture who dominates the ball so much, and now those touches are going to Tyrese Maxey, it is kind of just an educated guess you can make that his averages are going to go up a couple points. With Kobe White, the team quite literally looks better with him now. Zach LaVine was a negative player for them this year. And when Zach LaVine got hurt and Kobe White had more of an opportunity, we saw him just explode in performances. And now he's up to 20 points, averaging 5 assists. His efficiency is great. I do feel like this is one of those picks, but I like the point that you made about we should acknowledge players making a leap from just starter to all-star level player, because if you look at the past MIP award winners, that's what Jimmy Butler did. That's what CJ McCollum did. That's what Victor Oladipo did in his 1 year in Indiana before he got hurt. That's what Giannis did. That's what Siakam did. Julius Randle and Laurie, like all these guys took all-star leaps. And I think back to a couple years ago when Jeremy Grant was on the Pistons his very first year, and Jeremy Grant averaged 20. And there was a lot of talk because I remember the MIP race was between Randall and Grant. And there was a lot of talk of Jeremy Grant winning that award. But then you're like, well, he went from being a fourth option to being the first option on a terrible team, and he's averaging 20. So, of course, like his stats are going to go up, where Julius Randle legitimately took a leap and then made the playoffs. So I definitely understand your standpoint of it.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting with the Maxey argument, because you were talking about, obviously you take Harden's touches and give it to Maxey. I just looked it up real quick, and Maxey's fifth in the NBA at 87 touches a game right now. He's getting more touches than Trae Young this season. So I feel like you got to point to that and be like, he's just getting so much more opportunity. But with that, I also think the fact that he's getting so many touches and he's only averaging like 1.5 turnovers or something, and he remains a close to like 60% true shooting guy. I think that is a very good, which side do you land on? It's like, is it just more opportunity because he's getting 87 touches, or is it he's getting 87 touches, his efficiency and turnovers have not changed? That's a leap. So I think that's a really tough, like, philosophical question.
Yeah, where do you draw the line with this type of player? He's getting more touches and the volume should go up, but usually, if players get more touches, we've seen in the past that their efficiency goes down. They now become more turnover prone. And with these improved touches, with these increased touches, Tyrese Maxey is making the most of his opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I think definitely both deserving MIP candidates. As of right now, I would go with Kobe White. And would you too? Would you do it too?
I would as well. And I'm Chicago area, so that's the right now. So a little bit of bias there, but yeah, I'll go Kobe White.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Joe Moran Show. I want to thank you a lot, Tyler, for coming on. Guys, if you're listening, make sure to tune in to HoopVenue on YouTube. Tyler, if you want to get this, take this time to talk to the people, tell them where they can find you, you could do that.
Yeah, I mean, most of my stuff is found on YouTube, HoopVenue, like you said. I also have a Twitter and Instagram that I'm like semi-active on. But yeah, YouTube is really the bulk of where you'll find my work. So appreciate that, man.